Hey Grinder School, this is Uboat, otherwise known as Simon. I've been getting quite a few requests and IMs regarding the HUD for Pot Limit Omaha. So first of all, before we begin, just remember that the stats that you use is your personal preference. I think when you're grinding the microstakes of PLO, I think Vpip, PFR, and CBET in the flop is probably enough stats to get you by through the microstakes. But what I did was I opened my Poker Tracker 4 and I'll go over each one that I use and explain why. Okay. The first stat that I use is notes, which I should be using more of because when I'm going through hand histories, I really don't have my notes that I took in my PokerStars client. So it's something that I should use more of, but I'm a little bit too lazy to kind of change my habits, because what I do is I just write the notes on PokerStars and color code my opponents. So that one is something I think I should work on more, and I still keep it in my PT4, but sometimes I just wonder why. The next one is the player's name. I think it's really important because sometimes a lot of players change seats, and sometimes you might have, if you don't have the player's name on it, you might be looking at the stats of the previous player, especially when there's a new player seated at the table. And if you're multi-tabling, this is something that's really good to have. Next one is number of hands. And number of hands is probably not so important. What we want to do is, like, if I have something like 200 plus hands on someone, I know that my HUD stats are going to be fairly reliable. Next stat is total aggression frequency. This is something I thought once was important, but it's not too important anymore. It's a stat that I'll probably get rid of, because what I find is that making the reads, especially the cards that my opponents have at showdown, is probably a lot more important than this stat. But it's your personal preference again. For me, I think it's something that I don't need, and I'm going to get rid of it right now. No, I don't want to delete lines. Well, delete item. There you go. Now, next one. This is really important, actually. The pre-flop positional awareness. I like this because it helps me show that whether my opponents are positionally aware or not, and thus I can place them on a fairly accurate range. For example, like if I see their VPIP and PFR stats increasing from early position towards the button, I know that they're positionally aware, and they're probably opening very tight from early position and from the blinds, whereas they're loosening up quite a bit from the cutoff and the button, especially when their VPIP is 50 plus at the button. I know that they are very positionally aware, and especially when their EP is like 10% or less. So the next one is, what everyone's familiar with, VPIP. And VPIP is fairly important. What I did was I put these on a range. For me, 0 to 20 yellow, which means that they're fairly tight. I know in Omaha, we do play a looser game. I mean, it seems like a looser game, but it really isn't. But since we have combination of 4 starting hands, 40. I mean, if you're opening less than 20% of your hands, it's fairly tight range that you're opening up from. Okay, and anything between 20 to 40 VPIP, I see that as like regular, fairly solid players. My VPIP usually range between, I don't know, I think it's like 30. Sometimes 35, depending on which stakes that I'm playing. The lower stakes I play, I think I do tend to tighten up a little bit more. So when I'm playing micro stakes, I might be at maybe like 25, whereas if I'm playing like 100 PLO, I'll probably be more towards like 35 VPIP. And any player who is in the 40 to 100 range, I just categorize him as fish. So, well, very fishy at least. So I put the green tag on them. So now for my PFR. PFR, as we know, is opening. Your opening range. So I think anything from 0 to 10 is very tight, nitty. And anywhere between 10 to 25 is fairly decent range to be open raising with. And those are the type of players that I'm not going to really bluff too much, because it can be a leg or even like a tag. So in the borderline over there. And any PFR that's 25 plus, I regard them as fairly aggressive players. And those are the fun players if you're able to have position on them. So that's the stats for my PFR. And now next stat is kind of interesting. It's 3-bet pre-flop. If you already have started grinding Parliament Omaha, you'll realize that from 2 PLO all the way up to say 10 to 25 PLO, you're rarely going to be facing 3 bets pre-flop. And the reason being is I think a lot of people realize, well, maybe they don't, is that if you do 3 bets, anyone, even if you're on the button pre-flop, no one's going to fold to your 3 bets. So you're just bloating the pot for no reason in a multi-way. And even if you have premium hands like ace, ace, king, king double suited, it's not necessarily going to hit your hand. The flop is not going to hit your hand that much sometimes, especially when you're like multi-way with 4+ players. So 3-bet pre-flop, I think in the micro stakes is probably like not needed. But as you move up to say 50 and 100 PLO, where they do start heavily 3-betting you like crazy from the blinds, it's very useful stat to have. And like 3-bet 2, I mean, if you had micro stakes, I would kind of maybe skip by this section. But if you're approaching 25 PLO and 50 PLO, I think this is kind of important. Anywhere between like 0 to 10, or it could be 0 to 8, is a very tight 3-betting range. So you don't want to 4-bet those players. However, if they get to like 10 to 20, I think that's a solid 3-bet range. When you get up to a little bit of low stakes and creeping towards like 120 PLO, and anyone who 3-bets more than 20 to 100 is a 3-betting donk, and you must adjust your 4-betting range and start 4-betting light against these players, and you'll get their stacks. And next stat is also kind of insignificant in micro stakes PLO because no one folds to 3-bet pre-flop. So if anyone has, if you do have this stat on at the micro stakes, you're going to find that a lot of people are in the 80 to 100%. Sorry, not 80 to 100%. They're going to be like 0 to 50%. They're rarely going to be folding pre-flop. So 0 to 50, if they're unable to fold to 3-bet pre-flop, I put them as red because I'm not going to really 3-bet them like a maniac. Whereas if they had a fold to 3-bet of 75 to 100, I'm going to 3-bet them like a maniac. And I'll be the guy who has a 3-bet pre-flop range of say 25 plus. And, but I rarely see anyone adjusting to my 3-bets. So that's 3-bets. Next one is a very important stat. It's C-bet the flop. And you can always, this is where you start to make a lot of money. If you find that there's a lot of, if your opponent tends to C-bet flop 100%, it's a good chance to float and see if they tend to fold on the turn. Or another little bit more of high variance route is if they have close to 100% C-bet flop, you can check raise them. And most likely they will fold to your re-raise. Because at the micros, not everyone's going to battle you out and risk their stacks by aggression. And most likely they will fold at the micro stakes. So, and I color coded them too. So anything from 0 to 45 C-bet, I put that as like yellow. So which means that they will probably check fold most times if they have that range. Whereas if they're anywhere from the range of 45 to 75, I think it's a fairly decent stats for C-bet. I think 45 is probably a little bit low, but anywhere between say like 55 to 75 is pretty decent C-bet stat to have. And I really like to be a little bit more aggressive, maybe towards the 70, 75. And anyone who C-bets the flop 75 to 100% is just leaking money. They're just throwing away money. So those are the type of players that you want to play in position and float, and then if they check back, take the pot on the turn, no matter what kind of cards that you have. So next stat is fold to flop c-bet, and again, going back to the wet flops and dry flops, if anyone has a flush draw, they're not going to be able to fold to any c-bet on the flop. So just be aware of that. Just look at the board texture, and you do have to be aware of that. But I color coded these also. So anyone who folds to c-bet, say 80 to 100 times, I put them as green because then we can c-bet them like crazy and they'll fold. Whereas anything between 60 to 80%, I would tread cautiously. And 0 to 60, I'll only be c-betting with a really strongly made hand or with a strong draw. Okay. And with the turn and fold to turn c-bet, at the micro stakes, I wouldn't worry too much about it. No one bluffs on the turn at micro stakes. So, c-bet, you c-bet if you have a strong hand, strong made hand, and you check back. If you don't have it, you're not going to bluff. It's rare that people at the micro stakes bluff on the turn, and that's why in some ways it's good to second barrel on the turn to take the pot down, especially when you are in position. So I don't know if I have these color yeah, because I usually go more by reads and fold to turn bets too. If someone has high tendency to fold to turn c bets, well, you're gonna barrel like crazy against these people. Okay. And attempt to steal also, I categorize these into 3 different sections. Attempt to steal from late position, attempt to steal from small blind, and fold to steal. The reason why I separated attempt to steal to late position and small blind is that they're quite different. Players who are trying to attempt to steal from, say, the cutoff and more likely from the button tend to min raise to take the blinds down. And those are the type of players that I want to 3-bet like crazy, and they will fold. And the reason why they min raise is trying to, get more for their money, right? They only have to min raise to take the blinds down. So it's very profitable if they are able to do it. But if you do see someone who's trying to attempt to steal more than, say, 80 to 100%. I think I color coded these wrong too. Yeah, 80 to 100%. You want to 3-bet them like crazy. And people who don't tend to attempt to steal, if you're at the cutoff and and the player at the button has a very low attempt to steal the blinds, then you want to open raise to attempt to steal the blind from the cutoff. So it's a very important stat, I think, to observe, especially when you start seeing the turn. And again, what I'm starting to observe is at the micro stakes when I first started, it was kind of useless because no one really folded to any open raises. Everyone just called from the blinds no matter what. But what I'm noticing lately at the micro stakes is that people are starting to fold their blinds because I think they're realizing that they can't. Well, maybe some of them are starting to realize that they can't call profitably out of position with marginal hands. So that's why I think this is starting to become kind of important. So it's something that I would really slowly work into your game, especially when you start getting up to 10, 25 PLO. And attempt to small blind is really important because players like me, if all the hands are folded to me and I'm in the small blinds, especially if I have some trashy suited aces or any kind of like semi-connected cards, some like King, Jack, 7, 6, single suited or double suited, I'm going to try to attempt to steal from the small blind. And it is fairly profitable, but remember, you always want to look at the next stat on the person on the big blind to make sure that they have very high fold to steal. Usually 75 to 100, then I'm going to be trying to attempt to steal like crazy. And if you're stealing from the button, you want to multiply these two values. If, say, for example, what is it? If the percent small blind has a fold to steal of 80%, and also the big blind has 80%, well, 80.8 times 0.8 is going to give you 0.64, right? So all you have to do is be successful maybe 36% of the time to attempt to steal to make a profit, which is really good. So again, this is covering some of the basic stats that I use in pot limit Omaha. And again, it's your personal preference. The three stats that I do think is really important is your Vpip, PFR, and C-bet to flop. And feel free to add some comments and ask some questions about other stats that you think is important in your game or in PLO. And maybe I may agree with you, I may not. But remember, it's your personal preference. So hopefully this gets you started on some basic ideas of setting up your HUDs for pot limit Omaha. And I'll see you soon.